The air inside the Gilded Spoon was different from the outside world. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the feeling, the quiet hum of expensive conversations, the soft clinking of heavy silverware on fine china, and the smell of old leather and polished wood created a bubble of perfection. In this world, people didn't just eat. They conducted business, celebrated victories, and silently judged everyone around them. Isla moved through this world like a ghost, but a very useful one. She had been a waitress here for 3 years, long enough to become part of the furniture. Her uniform was crisp and black, a stark contrast to the jewel tones and silk worn by the guests. She knew who preferred their water with no ice, who always sent the steak back to be cooked 1 minute longer, and who tipped generously only when they were trying to impress someone. Her focus was a shield, a way to get through her shift without being seen. She was there to pour, to serve, to clear, and to disappear. Tonight, like most nights, she was almost invisible, but in a corner booth a man was getting bored. His name was Damon Vance, a name that appeared in magazines next to words like tycoon, innovator, and disruptor. He was young for a billionaire, with a sharp suit, an even sharper jawline, and eyes that seemed to constantly look for the next thing to conquer. Right now, his conquest was a plate of scallops, but it wasn't thrilling him. His dinner companions, a mix of executives and a few hangers-on, were laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't that funny. Damon leaned back, the picture of restless power, and scanned the room. He wasn't looking at the art or the architecture. He was looking for a new toy, a small distraction to liven up his evening. His gaze passed over the other waiters and waitresses, all moving with a practiced, servant-like grace. But then it landed on Isla as she quietly refilled a water glass at a nearby table. She wasn't fawning or nervous. She just did her job with a quiet, steady energy. There was a stillness about her, a calm that seemed out of place in a room buzzing with ego. To him she looked like a blank canvas, and he suddenly had an urge to paint something messy on it. With a snap of his fingers that was just a little too loud, he called her over. The heads at his table turned to watch. Isla heard the snap and felt a familiar flicker of irritation deep in her stomach, but on her face, nothing changed. She walked over to the table, her notepad and pen ready, her expression a mask of polite neutrality. "Yes, sir? Can I get you anything else?" Damon Vance leaned forward, a slow, easy smile spreading across his face. It was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Actually, you can," he said, his voice smooth and a little condescending. "You look like you have a head on your shoulders. You're not just another pretty face carrying plates, are you?" His friends chuckled, sipping their expensive wine. Isla's expression remained the same. "I'm here to take your order, sir," she replied, her voice even. He waved a dismissive hand. "The food can wait. I want to see if you're as smart as you look." He reached into a slim leather briefcase beside him and pulled out a flat, black box. He opened it on the table. Inside was a game board, but it wasn't like any board game you'd find in a toy store. It was made of dark wood and polished metal, with intricate patterns and strange, abstract pieces. It looked more like a piece of modern art. "This is Sovereign's Gambit," Damon announced, a note of pride in his voice. "It's a game for strategists. A mix of chess, economics, and pure psychology. They play it in boardrooms and private clubs, the places where real decisions are made." He looked up at Isla, a challenge glinting in his eyes. "I bet you've never even heard of it." He had her there. She hadn't heard the name, but the board itself. Something about it felt familiar, a distant echo from a time she had tried hard to forget. She said nothing. Damon loved her silence. It made him feel even more in control. "So here's the deal," he said, loud enough for the tables nearby to hear. A few people were starting to pay attention now, their own conversations forgotten. "We play one game. Right here, right now. If you win," he paused for dramatic effect, "I'll give you $50,000. Cash." A collective gasp went through the listening patrons. $50,000 was more than Isla could make in a year of tips. It was life-changing money. He let the number hang in the air before delivering the punchline. "But," he continued, his smirk returning, "if you lose, you have to serve my table for the next month. For free, and you have to wear this." He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a tall, absurd hat with a bright, fluffy plume on top. It was a jester's hat designed for maximum humiliation. His friends burst into loud, cruel laughter. The deal was clear. It was never about the game. It was about power. He wanted to see this quiet, composed waitress be publicly shamed. The room was waiting. All eyes were on Isla. They expected her to blush, to mumble an excuse, to back down. They saw a girl in a cheap uniform being cornered by a rich man. They saw an easy victory for Damon Vance. Isla looked at the ridiculous hat, then at the smug face of the man offering the bet. She saw the people watching, their faces a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. She felt a strange calm settle over her. The anger she felt earlier was gone, replaced by something cold and clear. She wasn't just a waitress. And this wasn't just a game. She looked Damon Vance directly in the eye. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but cut through the silence of the surrounding tables like a knife. "I'll play." The two words landed with such weight that the laughter died instantly. The smirk on Damon Vance's face didn't just falter. It vanished completely, replaced by a look of genuine surprise. He had expected a surrender, a refusal, or tears. He had not expected this quiet, unwavering acceptance. For the first time that evening, Damon Vance looked like he might have just found himself in a game he hadn't planned on playing and in. The middle of the hushed, fancy restaurant, the waitress stood tall, ready to show him exactly what she was made of. The challenge had been accepted, and a strange tension filled the air. A small table was cleared in the center of the room, creating a stage for their unusual contest. Damon, now fully alert and intrigued, carefully set up the polished game board. Isla slipped off her server's apron, folding it neatly and placing it on a side station. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. She was taking off the uniform of the waitress and preparing to play as something else. When she sat down opposite the billionaire, she didn't look nervous or intimidated. She looked calm, focused. The crowd, which had been whispering and gossiping, fell into a hushed silence. Phones were discreetly angled towards the table. This was better than any movie. It was real-life drama, the powerful, arrogant billionaire against the quiet, working-class girl. Everyone had already written the ending in their minds. They were here to watch the train wreck. Damon played the first move with a flourish, sliding a large, intimidating piece to the center of the board. It was an aggressive, showy opening designed to announce his dominance from the very start. He wasn't just playing to win. He was playing to crush. "Ladies first," he said with a grin. But it was clear he had already taken the lead. Isla studied the board for a moment, her eyes tracing the lines and patterns. Then she made her move. It was small, almost timid. She placed a simple-looking piece in a quiet corner of the board, far from the action. It seemed like a defensive, almost passive move. A few of Damon's friends snickered. "Afraid to come out and play?" One of them whispered loudly. Damon laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Playing it safe. Smart, I suppose? But safe never wins." He followed up with another bold move, pushing his advantage, trying to control the entire center of the board. He was building a fortress of power, and Isla's lone piece in the corner looked like a forgotten outpost. For the next few rounds he continued this way, making big, loud moves, capturing her pieces when she moved them too close, all while talking to his friends as if she wasn't a real threat. He was putting on a show, but Isla wasn't playing his game. While he was building a castle, she was digging a series of quiet, interconnected tunnels. Her pieces moved in ways that seemed random to the untrained eye. A slide to the left, a retreat to the back, a small piece nudged just one space forward. To the onlookers it looked like she was just trying to survive, scrambling to keep her few remaining pieces from being destroyed. They saw her as a victim, patiently waiting for the inevitable end. However, in a dimly lit booth near the back of the restaurant, an old man named Mr. Sterling was watching with a different kind of focus. He was a regular at the Gilded Spoon, a retired investor who had seen more than his share of big egos and brilliant minds. At first, he had watched with the same detached amusement as everyone else. But now he was leaning forward, his brandy forgotten. His eyes weren't on Damon's big, obvious moves. They were on Isla's. He squinted, trying to see the pattern she was weaving. And then he saw it. It wasn't random at all. It was a web. A slow, patient, and incredibly complex web. Her pieces weren't being defeated. They were being positioned, linked together in a silent, invisible network. "Come on, girl, do something," Damon taunted, making another grand move that seemed to trap one of Isla's important pieces. He looked at her, expecting to see a flicker of fear or frustration. He saw nothing. She just looked at the board, her expression calm as a still lake. She didn't try to save the piece he was threatening. Instead, she made a completely different move, placing a small, insignificant-looking piece on the far side of the board. It was a move so quiet that almost nobody noticed it. Damon didn't even look at it. He was too busy celebrating his clever trap. He was about to make his next big, powerful move when Isla simply reached out and tapped the board with her finger. "Check," she said softly. The word hung in the air. Damon's triumphant smirk froze on his face. He looked at her, confused, then back at the board. He scanned it, looking for the attack. He couldn't see it. His fortress seemed impenetrable. "What are you talking about?" he asked, a little too loudly. "There's no check." Isla didn't say anything else. She just looked at the board. His eyes darted around, searching for the threat he had missed. And then he found it. It wasn't the piece she had just moved. It was the piece she had moved 2 turns before, working silently with the piece she had just placed. And that piece was supported by another piece and another. His own grand attack had blinded him to the quiet trap she had set. The move she had just made didn't seem to do anything on its own, but it was the final thread that pulled the net closed. He hadn't just walked into a trap. He had built the trap himself and then proudly stepped inside. A low gasp rippled through the restaurant. The laughter from Damon's table had completely stopped. They were all staring at the board, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. The girl who had been playing defensively, who seemed to be losing, had suddenly, silently, put the great Damon Vance in check. Mr. Sterling in the back booth allowed himself a small, slow smile. He knew then that this wasn't a game between a billionaire and a waitress. This was something else entirely. The girl in the simple black uniform wasn't just playing the game. She understood its soul. And for the first time all night, Damon Vance looked not like a predator, but like prey. The smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, hard focus. The game was no longer for fun. It was real. The one word, check, had changed everything. The playful, mocking energy at the table was gone, replaced by a sharp, tense silence. Damon Vance leaned forward, his body no longer relaxed and sprawling. He was now a coiled spring, his eyes locked on the board as if he could burn a hole through it. The game had stopped being a joke to him. It was now a fight, and he was determined to win. He moved his king out of danger, his hand making a sharp, angry sound as he slid the piece across the polished wood. Isla didn't react. She simply watched, her posture unchanged. She was still the calm center of a storm that was raging all around her. The next round of the game was different. Damon's moves were no longer loud and showy. They were fast, aggressive, and full of raw power. He was trying to overwhelm her, to smash through her delicate web with brute force. He stopped talking to his friends, stopped trying to impress anyone. His face was a mask of pure concentration, his brow furrowed, his jaw tight. He was no longer playing with a waitress. He was playing an opponent who had just proven she was dangerous. He began to raise the stakes, not with money but with words. "I see your little trick," he muttered, making a move that put one of her key pieces at great risk. "Cute, but tricks don't win against strategy." Isla's response was to move another piece in a way that seemed to sacrifice it for no obvious reason. To the watching crowd, it looked like she was falling apart. They saw his aggressive attacks and her quiet, seemingly self-destructive moves. It looked like the game was returning to the script they had all expected, the powerful man winning easily. But a few people, like Mr. Sterling in the back, could see what was really happening. Isla wasn't fighting fire with fire. She was letting his fire burn itself out. As Damon grew more frustrated, Isla seemed to become more at peace. The game board. with all its complex rules and pieces, was a language she spoke fluently. And the man sitting across from her was an open book. Every aggressive move he made was a window into his mind. He was impatient, arrogant, and he hated not being in control. She used that against him. She let him think he was winning, letting him build up his forces, only to subtly undermine his foundation with moves so small they were almost invisible. While she played, her mind drifted for a fraction of a second. A memory surfaced, not as a picture, but as a feeling. The smell of old paper and wood polish. The feeling of a large, warm hand covering hers, guiding a small game piece across a similar board. A voice, deep and gentle, echoed in her memory. "The board isn't just a map of the game, Isla," her father had told her, his voice calm and patient. "It's a mirror. You're not trying to beat the game. You're trying to beat the person sitting on the other side. You have to learn to read them. Are they greedy? Are they afraid? Are they proud? Those feelings are your real pieces." She blinked, bringing herself back to the present. The memory faded, but the lesson remained. She looked at Damon, at the tightness in his shoulders and the anger in his eyes. He was playing with pride. And pride, her father had always said, was the biggest weakness of all. She made a move that confused him. It was a retreat, giving up ground he had been fighting hard to take. He saw it as a victory. He took the space. She had abandoned, his confidence returning for a moment. He was so focused on her retreat that he didn't see her other hand, as she quietly moved a small piece that had been sitting forgotten on the edge of the board. It was a move that meant nothing on its own, but it connected two other pieces, forming a chain he hadn't even noticed. The restaurant was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had snuck out to watch the drama unfold. It was like a tennis match where the score was tied in the final set. Every move Isla made, the crowd leaned in, trying to understand its purpose. Every move Damon made, they held their breath. He had a reputation for being a master strategist in the business world, a shark who could smell blood in the water. But tonight, he was being outmaneuvered, piece by piece, by a woman who served him scallops for a living. Mr. Sterling watched, captivated. He had known many great players in his life, but he had never seen a style like this. It wasn't aggressive, nor was it purely defensive. It was responsive. It was like water, taking the shape of whatever container it was put in. She absorbed his energy and used it against him. The style felt familiar, a ghost from his past. It was elegant, patient, and utterly ruthless, hidden beneath a layer of pure simplicity. He had only seen it once before, a long time ago, from a man who was considered a legend, a ghost in the financial world who had vanished years ago. The game was nearing its end. Damon's pieces, once so powerful and intimidating, were now scattered and weakened. He had fallen into so many of her traps that he was on the defensive, trying to protect his king from threats that seemed to come from nowhere. He was exhausted mentally and emotionally. He stared at the board, his mind racing. He couldn't see a way out. His strategy was in tatters, his pride was in ruins. He was no longer looking at the pieces. He was looking into a mirror, and what he saw made him feel small and foolish. The quiet woman across from him hadn't just been playing a game, she had been reading his soul. And now she was ready to deliver the final, quiet blow. The final round was not a loud and fiery battle, but a cold, silent war. Every sound in the restaurant had been swallowed by the tension at the small table. The clinking of glasses had stopped. The murmur of whispered conversations was gone. All that existed was the quiet breathing of the onlookers and the soft, almost weightless sound of game pieces moving on the board. Damon Vance looked like a man who had wandered into a maze and couldn't find his way out. The confident, arrogant playboy from an hour ago was gone. In his place was a man cornered, his face pale and beaded with a fine layer of sweat. He was no longer playing for $50,000 or for the amusement of his friends. He was playing for something much more valuable, his pride. He, a man who built empires and bent markets to his will, was being systematically undone by a woman he had seen as nothing more than a temporary distraction. The thought was unbearable. His mind, usually sharp and decisive, felt foggy and slow. Every move he considered seemed to lead to another one of her invisible traps. He felt like he was trying to walk through solid walls. Isla, on the other hand, seemed to draw energy from the silence. She was no longer just a waitress or a skilled player. She was a calm, steady force of nature, like a deep ocean current that is unseen but can move mountains. She watched him, not just the board. She saw the way his eyes darted back and forth, the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for a piece. She saw his desperation. He had one last move left that felt like a spark of hope. It was a reckless, all-or-nothing gamble. He could move his most powerful piece in a way that threatened her king directly, forcing her to react. It was a suicidal move, as it would leave his own king completely exposed, but it was a move of pure aggression. It was a way to go down swinging, a final roar of defiance. It was the only move he had left that felt like him. He gathered all his frustration, all his humiliation, and poured it into that one final attack. His hand shot out and he slammed the piece down on the board, the sound cracking the silence like a whip. A few people in the crowd jumped in their seats. He looked up at Isla, his eyes burning with a desperate wild fire. "Check," he growled, the word tasting like victory in his mouth. He had forced her hand. He had made her play by his rules, if only for one moment. The room waited. Isla looked at the board, at his aggressive piece threatening her king. Then she looked at him, and for the first time all night her expression changed. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't triumph. It was a flicker of something else. It looked almost like pity. She saw the raw fear and ego behind his brave face, and she felt a quiet sadness for him. She didn't rush. She didn't make a dramatic counter-move. She didn't try to save her king or block his attack. Instead, her hand drifted over the board, past the center of the conflict, and her fingers gently picked up a small, plain-looking piece that had been sitting quietly on the far edge of the board for most of the game. It was a piece so insignificant that everyone, including Damon in his rage, had completely forgotten. It was even their dot. She moved it one space to the left. One single space dot. It was the quietest, most anticlimactic move imaginable. It did nothing to stop his attack. It didn't capture any of his pieces. It didn't seem to accomplish anything at all. Damon stared at it, utterly bewildered. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a confused croak. "I have you in check? You have to block me." Isla didn't answer. She just looked at the board. Her eyes moved from the piece she had just moved, along a strange diagonal line to a piece he had captured long ago. She then looked at another one of his pieces and another. His eyes followed hers, tracing the path she was seeing. And slowly, like a fog lifting, the terrible truth began to dawn on him. The trap wasn't on the board. The trap was inside his own head. Her last move didn't block his attack. It simply closed a door he hadn't even known was open. When he had made his grand final attack, he had been so focused on her king that he had completely forgotten about his own. Her small, quiet move didn't threaten him directly, but it cut off the only possible escape route for his own king. The game had been over before he even made his final move. He had checkmated himself. The realization washed over him like a bucket of ice water. The color drained from his face completely. His mouth fell open slightly, but no words came out. His grand, heroic last stand wasn't a last stand at all. It was just a stupid mistake. He hadn't been outplayed in a heroic battle. He had been tricked, led by the nose, and made to look like a fool. A profound, heavy silence fell over the gilded spoon. It was the silence of a shared, breathtaking shock. The waitress hadn't just won. She had dismantled him, not with a forceful blow, but with a whisper. She had let him hang himself with his own pride. Damon stared at the board, but he no longer saw the pieces. He saw his own arrogance, his own impatience, his own desperate need to be the hero. And he saw, reflected in the polished wood, the quiet, unmoving face of the woman who had seen it all along. He had been utterly and completely defeated. The silence that followed was the most powerful sound in the room. It was heavy, thick, and absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. They all just stared at the small table where the impossible had just happened. Damon Vance, a man whose name was synonymous with victory, sat frozen, his face a pale mask of shock and humiliation. He wasn't looking at the board anymore. He was staring at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. The great conqueror had been conquered, not by an army but by a single, quiet whisper of a move. Then from a dimly lit booth in the back a sound broke the spell. It was the slow, deliberate clap of a single pair of hands. Mr. Sterling, the old investor who had watched the game with such focus, pushed himself up from his table. He was a man of substance and dignity, and his movement commanded the attention of the entire room. He walked slowly towards the table, his footsteps the only sound. Every eye followed him. He stopped a few feet from the table, his gaze on the defeated Damon. Not the victorious Isla. You didn't just lose a game tonight. Son, Mr. Sterling said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. You were just outplayed. And not by a waitress. The word hung in the air. Damon looked up, his eyes clouded with confusion. Mr. Sterling turned his attention to Isla, and a look of deep, genuine respect softened his features. You play with his style, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. The same patience, the same elegance. I haven't seen a game like that in over a decade. He looked back at Damon, who was now listening with a dawning, horrified curiosity. Do you even know who you just challenged, young man? Mr. Sterling asked. That is the daughter of Arthur Finch. The name Arthur Finch struck Damon like a physical blow. It was a name from the history books of the financial world, a legend whispered among giants. Arthur Finch had been a reclusive genius, a master strategist who could predict market trends years before they happened. He was known as the Ghost because he never appeared in public, but his influence was everywhere. Then, about 10 years ago, he had vanished. His empire had crumbled in a matter of weeks, destroyed by a hostile takeover so vicious and so brilliant that it was still studied in business schools as a case study in pure, ruthless ambition. Mr. Sterling's voice cut through Damon's thoughts. Earlier tonight I overheard you bragging, the old man continued, his tone turning hard. You were boasting about the deal that made your career, the takeover of that old tech company, the one you engineered from the inside, leveraging their own debts against them. He paused, letting the words sink in. That company belonged to Arthur Finch, the takeover you're so proud of. It didn't just bankrupt him. It broke him. It destroyed everything he had built. The final, stunning piece of the puzzle fell into place for everyone in the room. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't just a game. It was a reckoning. The quiet waitress, the daughter of a financial ghost, had been face to face with the man who had ruined her family. And she had accepted his challenge. The crowd looked at Isla with a new sense of awe. They saw her not as a lucky waitress, but as a woman delivering a perfectly crafted, silent justice. She hadn't wanted the money. She hadn't wanted the fame. She had wanted him to see. She had wanted to beat him at his own game, using the very skills her father, the great Arthur Finch, had taught her. Damon looked from Mr. Sterling to Isla, his face crumbling as the full weight of his actions and his defeat washed over him. He hadn't just been outplayed at a board game. He had been publicly exposed and spiritually undone by the daughter of the man whose life he had shattered for a profit. Isla finally stood up. She didn't look at Damon with anger or triumph. There was only a quiet sadness in her eyes. She had her victory, and it was a hollow one. Mr. Sterling gave her a small, respectful nod. He was a true master of the game, he said softly. It's clear he taught you well. With a quiet dignity, Isla reached into Damon's briefcase, which still sat on the table. She didn't touch his money. Instead, she simply picked up her folded apron from the side station. She looked at Damon one last time, a look that was not of pity, but of finality. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She walked through the silent, stunned crowd as if she were simply leaving her shift at the end of a long day. She walked out the door of the Gilded Spoon, leaving behind a room full of the city's most powerful people, all of them sitting in a stunned silence, their world tilted on its axis. She left behind a humiliated billionaire, an old man's profound respect, and a story that would be told in hushed, amazed tones for years to come. She walked out into the night, A simple waitress who had reminded everyone that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the most power.